Moumita Ahmed, welcome to ITV Gold. I hope you're doing well today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited.
Yes, of course. You are on your campaign run right now and you're at a polling site because the District 24 City Council election is going on right now. It is early voting and the election is on February 2nd. So how is it going out there? What have you seen so far?
Yeah, it's a little bit slow. A lot of people aren't coming out right now because it's the middle of winter. It's very cold. So most people, I imagine, are going to be voting by mail, and that is kind of the response that we've been receiving when we talk to our neighbors. But there is a polling location out in Queens College that has a lot of voters coming out. There's another polling location at York College and then Queensborough Hall. So it's not as many people right now voting, but pretty good. Yeah. I guess for early voting per normal.
Of course, I can imagine. I have a lot of questions for you, Moumita, but starting this interview, I have to ask you, you are a progressive leader, you're a community organizer, you've seen what's happening across the nation. What are your comments on the Capitol mob attack that we saw a few weeks ago? How did you react to it as a South Asian?
I mean, I was disheartened because there was this attempt to discredit our democracy and make it look like our elections are unfair, similar to how it's done in other countries where there's where they don't have a strong democracy, like third world countries, for example, right? And for me personally, I was affected to see the white supremacist flags and the Nazi symbols and along with Trump flags. All of it was just so disturbing and very scary moment for our democracy.
Yes, for
sure. And as a South Asian, definitely felt unwelcomed and a little afraid for the future.
Yes, I can only imagine. What are your expectations from the incoming administration, well, the new administration right now? What are your expectations when you're looking at that attack itself?
So we're already seeing changes happening. Joe Biden, first of all, got rid of the Muslim ban, which was put in effect by Donald Trump, and expanded some of the immigrant policies that were closed off to, for example, undocumented immigrants, DACA recipients. And so we're already seeing changes happening. We are back. We signed on to the climate accord again, right? So changes are happening. So I'm very hopeful that this administration will undo some of the harm that Donald Trump did to our democracy and our country. And I'm especially looking forward to Kamala Harris's vice presidency because, as a senator, she voted 92% of the time with progressive senators like Bernie Sanders, and she co-sponsored the Medicare for All bill. So, and, right now we do need to address COVID-19. So more resources need to be put to helping working class people, but we're on a good path.
Yes, for sure. Let's now talk about your campaign and all that's happening. My first question to you is, you have, said that you are for the working families. You want to make changes for the working families. District 24 is super diverse. It has a South Asian population. How do you hope to work for these working families? Why are you so focused on them?
When I was a 8-year-old who immigrated here with my parents, I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, which we shared with 3 of our relatives. Me and my brother, we had to turn our living room into a bedroom for us, and that was a really difficult upbringing, right? Being housing insecure, and that's unfortunately the reality of so many immigrants who move in here. And so I want them to have a better life. I want our kids to grow up in not feeling housing insecure, having their own space, right? I want families to be able to afford an apartment, afford to live in this district where so many South Asian people live, where there's, you have the groceries that serve South Asian ethnically appropriate food, right? So this is our community. And if we can't even live here, then what is the point? And so I'm fighting for those people. If I'm elected, I will make sure that every renter has legal support and immigrants have access to language accessible legal support, and for homeowners, small homeowners, that they have, a fund to pull through to pay their mortgage, because so many of them couldn't afford to during the pandemic. And also legalize basements so that our homeowners can house more, can rent out to immigrants without worrying about being the Department of Building fining them thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right. Let's talk about COVID-19 and District 24's pertinent issues. I want to get through as many issues as possible. What has, according to you, been the healthcare and economic ramifications of COVID-19 on District 24? And do you think the state and the local governments are doing enough to combat it?
Frankly, no, because when the pandemic first started, people were still going to temples, they were still going to mosques and churches, and because there wasn't really any resources or community-based organizations that do exist here, had very little funding to carry out information and get the information that this virus is bad, like people need to stay home on time. And due to that, our district became a red zone. And it's also a transportation desert, so people weren't able to access food from the food pantries the same way that others did in other parts of Queens, like Astoria, for example, right? And so that's when we started Queens Mutual Aid Network, because we realized our community members weren't getting ethnically appropriate food. For example, our seniors were sent granola bars and high sugary treats that are bad for them, because most of them have diabetes and other gastro diseases, right? Like, so these are things that the city failed to take into account, the people who would be most impacted, and how to reach them and how to get help to them. And that's why all of these new mutual aid networks popped up. I co-founded one called Queens Mutual Aid Network, and we served over 2,000 families ethnically appropriate food, medicine, whatever that they needed. We also are helping 12 families pay rent, families who are undocumented and didn't receive pandemic relief. These are things the city should have done. But instead, their doors were closed. Our small businesses couldn't pay rent. They could have easily made the food and distributed to the communities. But instead of funding them, the city hired contractors who I don't know what they did with the money, but they definitely did not serve ethnically appropriate food or nutritious food to the community.
How bad is the issue of food insecurity there right now? And what are you exactly going to do to combat that?
Food insecurity is bad, and it's unfortunate because we are living in the richest city on the planet, in a state whose economy eclipses those of nations, in a country that is the richest country in the world, yet our communities are suffering. They're food insecure. They don't have, they're having a hard time affording food. And that's such a tragedy. And so what we would do in city council is, first of all, open our doors and make sure that there's more contact tracing programs and food distribution programs, like actually hire people in the community to do that. And that's how we would do both, which is tackle joblessness, right now, because so many people are unemployed, and distribute and provide the food that people need. And we would also bring in our restaurants. We would make sure that they have some sort of funding so that they can make the food, or they can prepare it for the communities and be able to pay their rent. The other thing that I would do in city council is pass the Small Business Job Survival Act to make sure that our mom and pop shops that haven't been able to pay rent, that are behind on their rent, aren't behind anymore, that they have some relief and support, some monetary support.
Right. You're also fighting for immigration justice. I'd like to know what are the issues of immigrants currently in District 24 and what changes do you hope to make?
Yeah, so immigrant justice is very dear to my heart as an immigrant myself. When I moved here, I had to translate for my parents since I was 8 years old and have had to help them navigate this system that is becoming increasingly more difficult for our immigrant community. So what we need is more language accessibility in our government. So making sure that our immigrant communities have legal support when they go to housing court, that's language accessible, that the documents, government documents, that they're all in simple language and also translated in various languages that are appropriate in the community based on who lives in the community, right? That there's an emphasis on that, and making sure that people with immigration issues, right, that they have access to an immigration lawyer for free, because oftentimes what happens is certain people will exploit, right, the fact that somebody doesn't speak English very well and charge them more extra money or like take advantage of them, right? And so I think something like legal support for immigration questions should just be taken over by city council. That's something that should be part of our constituency servicing.
Right. You're also calling for transforming of public safety. My question to you is, how are you looking at racial justice as well as policing?
So I am for shifting the budget away from surveillance technology, overseas headquarters. I don't know why the NYPD needs overseas headquarters. Things like settling lawsuits. They're settling, just this year they settled $1 billion worth of lawsuits. And also the PR, public relations, not sure why they need that. Also things like militarizing and getting military-grade gears. I'm not sure why police officers need military-grade Army gear either. Overtime pay. So if somebody, for example, gets pulled over for tinted windows, 2 or 3 cop cars show up. That's a waste of money. So there's many ways that the NYPD is wasting money, and we need to make sure that we elect a civilian complaint review board that's independent and will hold the police accountable, and that we shift that money away from those things and instead spend it on hiring more social workers to respond to 911 calls, mental health experts to respond to these 911 calls, that we create more student youth employment programs, that we invest in our hospitals, mental health support, homeless shelters, right? And invest in the youth in particular, so that instead of putting people in jail and instead of locking them up, we have a situation where our jails are overcrowded right now, that we have the need to build more prisons just to manage. And there's so many people in jail right now who are in there for little things like having a little, a dime of marijuana in their pocket or something like that. And so we need to take a look at who's in prison right now, right? Like the people that aren't violent criminals, they don't need to be there. So we need to end cash bail, and we need to decrease our prison population because we can't continue this system of oppression.
Another issue that I wanted to talk to you about, Moumita, was the education crisis that's facing New York City and actually students all across the country. There are many students that don't have access to internet, that don't have access to the right books. Many siblings are sharing laptops where, one sibling cannot attend all classes. How are you going to ensure that everybody in District 24 has access to equal opportunities as well as a student, and also has access to all the resources needed for education?
That's a great question, and again, so dear to my heart, because I watched that video of the kids in California who were using Taco Bell's Wi-Fi to do their homework. And believe it or not, that's the reality of kids in our district. There are families who cannot afford high-speed internet. In fact, even my internet right now is unstable because there's just certain parts of the district that don't have high speed. There's a lot of throttling. And so it's an extra nuisance, and it's extra difficult for working class students to be able to do their homework, to have the proper accessories and equipment along with their laptops and tablets to do that work. So I think that those families need extra help. And so we need to, again, create a pool of funding for these families so that they're able to do remote learning during this pandemic, that they're able to afford remote learning, and that they're able to afford childcare, because a lot of parents are working class and can't just sit at home with their kids to help them with remote learning either. It's a very catch-22 situation. So we really have to understand the struggles of these parents, and when making any decisions around when to open schools or how to open schools or how to do remote learning like that, we take into account the voices of these working class parents and teachers as well. So, and the students that would be most impacted by these decisions. And my I have a long-term policy of funding our schools, which is really, really important. I went to a specialized high school, and I had I was lucky enough to get a really great education, but I want that for everyone in our district. Right. It shouldn't be that you have to take this really difficult path just to get the best education. I think that we need to have, every school should be like our specialized high school.
Moumita, so that the city council works on budgeting, if I'm right. Where do you think we need the most amount of money right now invested into District 24th?
Right now, we really need to invest in our schools and our housing because so many people, 1 in 14 children in District 24 are homeless. That's a really high number, and we need to address that. We need to make sure that we work towards permanent housing, not just like temporary shelters, but permanent housing for our families. That requires us to reform the user process so that developments aren't imposed on the communities, that we're expanding the community land trust program to create below market rate housing, and that we are creating not affordable, meaning $2,000 per bedroom affordable, but actual affordable housing that's incumbent or dependent upon like the income of this district, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course. And I just have 2 more questions left here for you, Moumita. If you were to be elected in the city council, what are going to be your top 3 priorities right away in your agenda?
So my top 3 priorities, if elected, would be to make sure every renter has right to counsel. So, if they're facing eviction, that they have a lawyer by their side that is providing language accessible legal support. Pass the Small Business Job Survival Act, because so many of our businesses are behind on rent, and that's something the city council can pass right now. It's in the city legislation. Also passed Councilmember Jamani Williams legislation to require developments to submit a racial impact study to any new developments proposed to ensure that our property taxes don't get raised, that working class people can live in the neighborhoods where we grew up, right? And also making sure our education system is well funded, well staffed in terms of having PPEs, and in terms of remote learning, that families that are working class have access to a funding pool to provide laptops and whatever else for their kids to properly do, remote learning work.
Yeah, and finally, my last question to you, Moumita, has to be, there are many South Asians for the first time running for this city council seat, men and women. What differentiates you from them? And, how was the experience having so many South Asians for this candidacy?
Thank you for that question. So I actually helped pass ranked choice voting, which is, I was the field and education director for Common Cause. And so one of the beauty of this election is that if all of the South Asian community members come out to vote and rank us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can elect a South Asian city council for the first time ever. So it's a historic moment that and none of us should stay home. We should all be voting, especially if you can't come in, vote in person, vote by mail, but you need to vote. And it's, it's important because we don't have representation. And what sets me apart is I'm the only renter running. And I know what it's like to be working class, to struggle, to have to take care of elderly parents. I know what our seniors need, what our kids need, because I have the experience that many working class people in this district face growing up here. And I've also been a working class champion with a record of getting things done for our community, which is why I have so many endorsements from the Working Families Party. I'm also the only union endorsed candidate. I have the endorsement of Communication Workers of America, the Social Workers Union, Bangladeshi American Advocacy Group, the Jewish Vote, Hispanic American Voter Association, Asian American Chamber of Commerce, New York chapter. I have the endorsement of New York Communities for Change, New York Immigration Coalition. Okay, I got to take a break because there's just so many endorsements. And the reason why I have them is because I have proven that I've worked for working people, that I've done everything to advance our agenda in our legislature. I even have the endorsement of senators and assembly members. I have the endorsement of Assembly Member Ron Kim, the first Korean American elected in office, State Senator Julia Salazar, the youngest state senator in office, who's a housing champion, who passed the 12 housing laws to help working class people afford their homes, to expand rent stabilized apartments. So I have very good people behind me that are supporting our campaign. And that's what sets me apart, is that I'm the real deal. And if I wasn't, Wall Street wouldn't be attacking me. I'm sure people in the district got some mailers by Wall Street billionaire Stephen Ross, who's a Trump supporter, by the way, that spent $40,000 against me. Why? Because I actually have a chance to win. And I will actually transform our district. And that's why the real estate developers are so afraid of me.